Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publicists Association's Let It Be Known. Black students are 3 to 6 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school, and today there remains a regressive movement that continues to criminalize natural Black hairstyles under the auspices of preparing them for the real world. Discretionary school suspensions, particularly related to Black hairstyles, are shameful and disproportionately applied. Also, in the workplace, discrimination cases because of Black hairstyles have also soared. So far, 7 states have passed legislation that would make school and workplace hair discrimination illegal. At the federal level, the Crown Act, passed by the U.S. House of Representatives, seeks to ban race-based hair discrimination. The bill has yet to be approved by the Senate. We discussed it all this morning with Nat Mathis, the Bush doctor, NNPA TikTok manager, and Howard University journalism student Carrington York, Washington Informer journalist Sam Collins, Indianapolis Recorder journalist Oshia Boyd, and Katrina Hamilton of the Muslim Journal. But first, let's bring on the president and CEO, the well-traveled president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publicists Association, Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis, on your way again. Good morning.
Good morning, Stacy. I'm on my way.
We just lost Dr. Chavis. He's on his way to Houston, Texas, where our chair, Karen Carter Richards, I'm sure, awaits him. Our virtual conference begins this morning. Tune in beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern for the NNPA's Midwinter National Issues Forum, where the theme is Advancing the Black Press of America, Reaffirming, Engaging, and Empowering. Again, that's 11 a.m. this morning at NNPA/events or -events.com. Join us this morning live beginning at 11 a.m. Dr. Chavis, you're back with us.
Houston, Texas. Just a quick reminder, Group 1 will be...
Sounds like a boarding call for Houston. Doc, our National Issues Forum is this morning. Any thoughts you want to share?
Yes, I think it's very important that I'm able to have the input midway at 11 o'clock until 10 o'clock time. That's the issue for to be very to witness and that impact the quality of life. I'm on my way to Houston. Let it be known, continue, and I'll try to stay on as long as I can before the plane takes off.
All right, Doc, safe travels to the boss. Also in the news this morning, 2 years after the death of Breonna Taylor, the only criminal trial to arise from the botched police raid on her apartment continues today as hundreds of potential jurors gathered in a Kentucky courthouse in what activists see as a chance for some measure of justice. Individual question of jurors began last week, and they will continue this morning. The former Louisville officer facing trial, Brett Hankinson, was not charged in Breonna Taylor's shooting death, but is standing trial on 3 lower-level felony charges for allegedly firing his service weapon wildly into Taylor's neighbors' apartments during the March 13, 2020 raid. Here to talk about this is Muslim Journal journalist Katrina Hamilton, who has followed this case from its onset. Katrina, good morning.
Good morning, Stacy. Good morning to all of you beautiful viewers out there. And good morning, Dr. Chavis and all of our fellow journalists. I just want to say that, open it up by saying that, Malcolm X reminded us back in the 60s that the most disrespected woman, the most disrespected person on the face of this earth is the Black woman. We're going to play a piece right here.
The most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the Black woman. The most neglected person in America is the Black woman. And as Muslims, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us to respect our women and to protect our women. And the only time a Muslim really gets real violent is when someone goes to molest his woman. We will kill you for our woman. I'm making it plain, yes. We will kill you for our woman. We believe that if the white man will do whatever is necessary to see that his woman gets respect and protection, then you and I will never be recognized as men until we stand up like men and place the same penalty over the head of anyone who puts his filthy hands out to put in the direction of our women.
Powerful words.
Powerful words, right? And how can you follow up with those powerful words? But I will try. The fact remains that, this trial that's happening or that's about to occur is not even about Breonna Taylor's death. And we have to understand that this is about the negligence of one officer who was being charged with wanton, right, negligence, firing 10 shots into her neighbors' apartments. But yet the officers who actually murdered or shot Breonna Taylor, they were fired, and that's it. Right. And so the grand jury selection earlier on had stated that they had issues with what Deputy AG Daniel Cameron, and his withholding of evidence. So all of that to say, Breonna Taylor still is not getting justice. And why is it that a Black woman's case is not being recognized? What are we saying? What message are we sending to our children? There are so many Black women who are imprisoned, right, and neglected. And we have to also look at the implications of the fact that it goes beyond the Breonna Taylor shooting when we're looking at the way that the battering ram. I was doing the song, right? Batter ram back in the 80s. But the battering ram and how it's used in our African American communities versus other communities. So there's a whole backdrop story that we're not even looking at. But the fact remains, Breonna Taylor, is her family really going to receive justice? Is that $12 million enough? Will that bring her back?
Yeah. And these, you mentioned the battering ram, of course, the no-knock warrant. And this happened, folks, if you remember, this happened only months before the George Floyd situation occurred. And we know the officers in that case, they are they're facing federal charges now. And of course, Derek Chauvin, the primary actor in that case, was convicted of murdering George Floyd. But we still have not had any type of justice, as you said, Katrina, for Breonna Taylor. And that case is now about 2 years old.
It's about 2 years old. And interestingly enough, I was reading one report where the officer who, Mattingling, I believe, I have to be careful, as journalists, we must be careful, but I'll just state the facts. He stated that this case is not like Ahmaud Arbery. No one was hunted down. This case is not like George Floyd. There was no knee to the neck. Officers were doing their job. And so that's the fear, right? The implication, criminalizing this young woman, this victim, criminalizing her, saying that they were looking for her ex-boyfriend, and then criminalizing her boyfriend, her current boyfriend, trying to place blame on this Black man versus placing blame on the officers who killed this young woman in her home. And I do want to say one more thing. We often talk about rights. The Fourth Amendment states that we have the right to be safe in our homes. Yeah.
I watched just as a side note, and it kind of ties into this. I watched a show just yesterday, I was watching a show where a very racist white woman had started dating this Black man because she wanted him to kill her husband. Well, she wound up killing the husband herself because he wouldn't do it. And a Black district attorney wanted to charge the man because he was more convictable. This is what she said on the show, because she felt like this rich white woman with this high-power lawyer, there's no way they're going to get a conviction, but they can easily get a conviction of the Black man who actually refused and didn't do and wasn't even a part of the homicide. And you know, they say art imitates life and vice versa. You know, Katrina, that happens a lot.
It happens a lot. Look at the young woman in Connecticut where fentanyl was found in her blood system. She's dating this white male. The police officers tell her family that, you know, oh, he seems like he's a good young man. Like, really? Like, are you serious? You know, there was a young 16-year-old in Los Angeles who was found on the side of the 110 freeway. We spend so much more time profiling other people, right? And we still don't give enough respect to our Black women. I just want to say really quickly, too, because I know for the sake of time, there's a young woman named Tondala Hall. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison for allowing child abuse, while her actual abuser received 2 years. And this was back in 2014. Here you have a Black woman who is fearful of her life. She's in a domestic violence situation, and she gets 30 years for not protecting her children.
Yeah, and remember, Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed in her home, and she got a death sentence.
10 shots, a death sentence. And where is the justice for Breonna Taylor?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katrina, I know you're going to continue to keep us up to date on this trial of this officer. We know that even a conviction here, which is well deserved, shooting wildly into the neighbor's apartment, it still does not bring any type of justice for Breonna Taylor's family, because this is not about Breonna Taylor. Unfortunately, the charges are not about Breonna Taylor. We should say it's about this officer's actions while they were allegedly, we got to say allegedly, I guess, allegedly illegally entering Breonna Taylor's apartment and shooting just wantonly. So we appreciate you for that. And you certainly are welcome to stick around for our next topic. Black students are 3 to 6 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school. And of course, that goes in the workplace as well, as natural Black hairstyles have been criminalized under the auspices of, quote unquote, preparing them for the real world. We talk about it this morning with a slew of journalists this morning. And of course, we have a special guest this morning, Nat. What do you call him? The Mr. Bush? Bring him on, Greer. Bring on our guest. Let's talk about it. Sam Collins is joining us as well. Oshia Boyd is joining us as well. Nat Mathis, of course, the Bush doctor, is joining us. And we expected to have Carrington York as well. Our NNPA's TikTok manager joined the conversation. And there she is. How you doing, Carrington?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Good to have you. So let's start. I'm going to start with you, Carrington, because look, I heard a discussion you had the other day. It was so inspiring to me. You had a discussion with Claudette Perry, the NPA's executive administrator, and it was just so inspiring. And I said to Greer, our great producer, we got to do something on this topic. How did we get here, Carrington, with this so-called controversy? It is controversy, right, over Black hair.
How did we get here? Well, it goes back to 1619, doesn't it? You know, when the first enslaved people arrived to America, of course, this culture around the discrimination of our hair, and it's become so radicalized throughout the years, especially in places like school and work. And so sometimes when you show up with your hair like this in a meeting, it becomes a topic of conversation, and it isn't as normalized as it should be.
Yeah, and I know Sam. Sam, you see the profound way in which Sam wears his hair. Sam, what kind of feedback have you gotten, good and bad?
Feedback's been pretty polarizing, and to be honest with you, I get it mostly from Black people, and it's in the context is how do I navigate professional circles? Those who have something to say about it, they often question when I'm going to cut it. But I also get positive feedback. My hair attracts a positive vibration among people who understand the significance and why exactly it is that I did it. So if you see me in the street, it's very often they might call me Roz, they call me brother. So it's a give and take, but a lot of the reactions mostly come from Black people, and it's a question of navigating professional circles.
Yeah, we're experiencing some difficulties with Nat, the Bush doctor's camera, so we should have him back shortly. But I want to go over to you, O'Shea, because it is truly a long-standing issue. Because remember, Marcus Garvey, it goes back way back, right? I think Carrington said it goes back to slavery and pre-slavery. But Marcus Garvey once admonished, he said, "Don't remove the kinks from your hair, remove them from your brain." Yet here we are, same issue. O'Shea, what have you seen with this issue?
Same thing. We're still battling this respectability politics with our hair. We want acceptance. That's one of the reasons why you hear, how do you navigate professional world? Because we're curious, because we're often told you can't work if you have your hair in locks, if you have your hair natural, if your hair is unkept. So, and it's oftentimes we perpetuate that as Black people. We perpetuate that. We go. I've been natural most of my life. I used to get my hair pressed when I was younger. When I went back natural and decided I wasn't going to have a perm, wasn't going to press, I remember people in my family were like, "What are you doing? What's going on with your hair? Oh, why are you wearing your hair like that?" And it's like, this is my hair, though. This is the hair that grows out of my scalp, and this is how it naturally is. So what is the problem with that? We are the only people whose hair is policed the way it is. I mean, it's everything about Black people. Our entire bodies are policed. As I've said before, our bodies are not our own.
Yeah, how about that? And I like what David Youngblood writes in. David says, "Well, I'm bald, so I'm just normally jealous of any hairstyle." David continues to make some great contributions to our program. We appreciate you, David. But Carrington, let's go back because we also know that there's the Crown Act, right? But this thing runs really deep because kids are being suspended from school because they're here. They're being bullied by, sometimes even the educators are bullying the students because of their hair. And we see people are not getting job opportunities. They're losing jobs. The Crown Act has not been passed by the Senate, and it's only in a handful of states. So what needs to happen, Carrington?
Overall, we as a country have to get over this desire to police Black bodies, just as it was said, and that includes our hair. There's this idea that our hair is unkempt, just how it grows out of our head, and that isn't professional, that isn't appropriate for school settings, for athletic settings, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So when we as a country get over that, whichever side is coming from, when we get over that, I think we'll be able to move forward and enjoy the beauty that naturally is a part of us.
Yeah, and I know Katrina Hamilton wanted to weigh in. Katrina?
Thank you, Stacey. I just want to say, I constantly remember Dr. Chavis saying on one program that, Blacks as a people, we are not a monolith. We're not a monolithic group. And one of the things we haven't said is that even within our natural hair, there are variances, right? So now I think we call it the 4C, the 4B, 3A, 3B, and all of this. And we've always had this, good hair, bad hair type of thing. And even when you're looking at this show, as Sam stated, most of the hatred comes from our own people, and even in the schools. And what happens, unfortunately, and we know the media is a strong powerhouse, right? And so we know that even with what in 2020, we saw this emergence of natural hair. But the irony was that even within that emergence that the media was picking up, it was still the 3A, 3B that they were glorifying. You rarely saw models with 4B or 4C hair, right? The kinkier or coilier hair. And so until we can get past that and realize that it's about humanizing us, really, because everything that you look at, whether it's our hair, it's our skin, the darker or coilier or kinkier it is, the more dehumanizing it becomes, the more unkept it is, right? The more unsightly it is. And so this psychologically wears on our children. And when we're talking about the suspension and expulsion rates, especially of Black girls and Black boys, but let's go back to the Black girls, because Black boys, some of them, they can just cut their hair off. And I know some sisters can too, but most little children don't want to cut their hair off at that stage. So when you're in a school and someone's calling you nappy-headed little girl, look at you, or the teacher, girl, can't you fix your hair? Whether it's a Black or white teacher, that child is psychologically being told that they are different. And so now they're going to act out, right? Then they're going to be suspended and then eventually expelled. I saw a little African-American girl about my complexion. Hair was very coarse, and she was always fighting. And everyone would come in, oh, she's just so mean. The Black boys were calling her ugly. The little Latina and white girls are saying, oh, look at your hair, making fun of her. So she was always fighting. And I asked the administration, have you ever talked to her and just asked her why she acting like this? She was the sweetest child, but she was tired of being bullied at school. Yeah. And so we have to look at these implications when it comes to our hair. Sorry, I had to chime in.
No problem. That's very, very valuable, I believe, to this conversation. But let's go to the other side, though, because, look, white folks imitate us a lot. And the hair is not off limits. We've seen a lot of that, too, right? We've seen I've seen white guys with dreadlocks, right? Or try to get the locks. I've seen white women, try to go, if you will, natural, like nappy or whatever. I'm sure you've seen that, Carrington.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it. It's become a trend to, appear to be Black, but of course not deal with the implications of what it means to be Black 24/7, 365 days out the year. And that's when we come into this issue of cultural appropriation and the idea that to be Black is a costume that can be taken off and washed out your hair and, all those kinks that people imitate. And that's really where the issue comes in. I know a lot of people try to liken it to, imitation is the best way to show admiration and things like that. Yeah. It's not about that. It's about privilege. And we don't have the privilege to undress out of our identity and, not deal with the ugly side of it.
Yeah, and see, look at that photo right there, right? That was just up a moment ago. That photo there is exactly what I'm saying, right? Sam, this appropriation, right? What do you call it?
Cultural appropriation.
That's basically what it is. And honestly, it happens with everything concerning Black people. First, they ostracize us for having it, and then as soon as we regain our pride in having it, they co-opt it. They commercialize it, and then they expand it where other races, white people in particular, or just any race in general, can popularize their hairstyle even further. And it happens with everything, as it relates to Black people. But, I often like focusing on Black people in the spirit of self-determination, as the theme of the show is called. We have to regain our confidence about our hair, and we have to understand why our confidence about our hair was taken in the very first place. Black hair, African hair, we were the first people. I always say that. And if you internationalize this issue, you will see that it's not only in the United States where Black people are being marginalized for their hair. You take it to Jamaica, you take it to Ghana, you take it anywhere else, you will see that Black people are being marginalized for their hair. You have people in government, police officers especially, cutting off Black hair. And it's because of that power that comes with Black hair, not only politically, but spiritually. If you look in the Holy Scriptures, for example, for my followers of the Abrahamic religions, they tell us in Numbers chapter 6, verse 5, in the vow of separation from the Most High, to not cut our hair, to not cut the edges of our beard, because hair holds so much power. Hair attracts people. Like I said before, it's a certain vibration. So we're talking about psycho-spiritual warfare at hand. And it's gotten to a point that Black people have taken that on, and they've become a buffer group in determining which people are legitimate and who's not because of hair. And they will be the very same people, my last point, who will tell you not to worry about a white person or whoever else co-opting our hairstyle because it's just hair. But it's not just hair. If it was just hair, then they wouldn't have asked our sisters to cover their hair during the antebellum period, and they wouldn't have cut off indigenous hair either when they were colonizing North America, so forth and so on. So it's much deeper than just appearance.
Well, let's do a little history here. Whether rocking afros or pressed hair, Black protesters demanded the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination. The act also created the EEOC, which operates as the lead enforcement agency in the area of workplace discrimination. When the EEOC was founded, the federal government's primary concern was that Black people be granted equal access to public workplaces. It didn't foresee that Black hair would need equal access as well. So we go back to the Civil Rights Act, right? It's more modern than of course 1619. But even with that, right, we've seen some issues after that. The first natural hair discrimination case came in 1976. It was the case of Jenkins versus Blue Cross Mutual Hospital Insurance. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit upheld a race discrimination lawsuit against an employer for bias against afros. The appeals court agreed that workers were entitled to wear afros under the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. While afros were technically allowed in workplaces, the social pressure to emulate Eurocentric hair permeated American society, impacting Black women's hair grooming decisions. So it seems like that decision, right? And back then, with all that happening, this is what many want to bring back. They want to police, as you guys said, Carrington, Katrina, they want to police Black hair. And we can talk about it. I can start with Carrington on that.
Well, I was going to say they want to police it because, again, they want to police us. It's just another level. It's just another level of policing and maintaining and keeping us, quote unquote, in our place. Black hair is not seen as beautiful, and it is. But we have to realize it's beautiful. We have to recognize whatever your hair type may be, it's beautiful. Your hair can do things no one else can do. People can't do what we can do with our hair. It's amazing what we can do with our hair. We need to celebrate that versus thinking we should hide that.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. I think Carrington, you wanted to weigh in.
I agree. We are unique, and when we are able to function and are at 100%, which means appreciating every part of us, not dealing with these systemic issues and things of that nature, then we're an unstoppable people. So it becomes this issue of trying to stop us from living in our complete power, which includes our hair, includes the confidence that comes with our hair. And so I think it's a tactic that's been used over the years, of course, since we came to this country. And if we get over that, we're unstoppable, and that's scary to some people.
Yeah. Oshia?
I agree. I think if we, like I said, we embrace our own hair, we embrace our beauty. That goes a long way. That goes a long way to making us feel confident, to understanding who we are as people, and understanding our hair is so beautiful and unique. No one can do what we can do. I look at braids, we can color it, we can chop it off, we can let it grow back, we can do all these wonderful things with it. We can grow locks, we can chop them back off, and 2 years later you have them again. It's just amazing what we do with our hair. And everyone wants to do that. They really are envious of what we can do. We need to own that.
Yeah, and so Sam, is that the problem? Is that the underlying problem there? You mentioned power, of course, but is that the underlying problem, the envy?
Definitely. By the end of the day, it's all about envy and it's all about control. When you envy somebody, you want to control them and you want to make sure that their view of themselves is less than in comparison to you. And that's often the whole premise of what they call white supremacy. And I'm always an advocate for expanding our view of history. And I'll go on to say, I hope that we conduct research about the correlation between natural hair and entrepreneurship. Just given the fact that people who are unbridled in their choice of hair, how often they have to step out of corporate America, at least over the past few decades, and pursue independent opportunities because they couldn't enter the office without, their natural hair. I would definitely like to see that. And I think that definitely speaks to how hair, especially among Black people, is a symbol of freedom. Because, if you are growing out your hair, if you are wearing your hair naturally and you're being ostracized and you stand deep in your beliefs and your conviction, there's nothing else you can do but to step outside. And that's something that many people don't want for us. They don't want for us to step in ourselves and to be confident. So yes, it is envy.
But it's also a matter of, and you all are absolutely right, it's a matter of the dollar. And Sam, you reminded me of that, right? Hair for Black women in particular is a multi-million-dollar industry, right? Relaxers, pressing, curling, all of that, flat ironing, right? I'm dating myself, but it's a multi-million-dollar industry. And so when you take that control away from them, when you're becoming conscious about yourself, that's a whole nother level. You're now hurting the dollars. And that's not okay. But it is, again, about racial and social stratification, control. And as long as we're continuing not to like ourselves, then we can be manipulated. And I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, Bobby Henry of the West Side Gazette in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, he writes in, he says, anti-Black hair sentiment on U.S. soil has existed for centuries. In the 1700s, enslaved women who worked in the fields usually covered their hair in head rags due to the harsh demands of their work. Enslaved Africans who worked in the quote-unquote big house, however, sometimes mimicked the hairstyles of their enslavers, either by wearing wigs that had become popular during that era or shaping their kinky hair to emulate them. In cities like New Orleans, however, where free Creole women of color donned, and Bobby, we didn't get the rest of your statement, but we get the point that this goes back to slavery, as it was said earlier in the program. But let's bring it up to now. We talked about the 60s and 70s. What about the 80s and 90s? And the 80s and 90s, it ushered in more Black women sporting pressed and permed hair, thanks to prevalent hair care ads on TV and in magazines that encourage Black women to alter the texture of their hair. However, this time period also witnessed the popularization of styles like braids and cornrows. Images of Black women celebrities showcasing braids encourage Black women to braid their hair. Someone gave the example of Janet Jackson in Poetic Justice with the braids. Wearing these hairstyles came with a price, as they created a legal firestorm. We know in 1981, a Black woman took American Airlines to court because the company demanded she not wear her hair in braids. The court sided with the airline and stated that the braids were not an immutable racial characteristic, unlike the afro. And then less than a decade later, the Hyatt Regency used that ruling to make employee Cheryl Tatum resign after she refused to take out the cornrows she wore to work. The American Airlines ruling established a standing legal precedent at that time. So Black hair has been the subject of major court cases. That says a whole lot, doesn't it, Carrington?
It does. It does say a whole lot. It goes back to this, idea of preserving the dollar first and foremost before preserving the person. That's never been the goal of America, to preserve anything that comes from Black and African culture. And so that's what we see when it comes to these court cases dealing with these companies that are trying to do what they believe is best for their profit. And of course, we get caught with the burden of all of that. And it's happened throughout history.
Yeah, a question for all of our panelists. It comes from, and I love this question, it comes from Claudette Perry, the executive administrator of the NNPA. She says, does the popular straight hair Barbie doll look that so many Black people have adopted say anything about their love or hate for themselves?
I'd say no.
And
not all the way.
And I'd say too that, again, when we're looking at media, especially with Black women, when you're often looking at the major roles that Black women get, and I know I'm going to tick some people off, but our sisters who are biracial are the ones who get those roles. So they have that naturally straight or naturally, again, 3A, 3B, whatever C hair. And so now you're looking at, if I want to make it into videos, or if I want to get into a show, if I want to do this or that, In order to be successful, I have to have straight hair.
Mhm.
And so we need to start advocating again for Black women, for all Black women, especially those of us who don't have naturally straight hair, because it's really about survival oftentimes. It's not about how you feel, it's about how you have internalized what others feel about you and what they portray about you, whether it's in books, curriculum, or television,
Yeah,
TikTok, and everything else.
yeah, and I do want to go back to Carrington to expound on her response to Miss Perry's question about that Barbie doll look. And you I think you said no.
I did say no. I believe that I think it's important to make sure that we're allowing Black people to have the freedom to choose. So if we're being policed in all these different ways, then the opposite of that is freedom. So we have this freedom we should be able to have the freedom and the no pressure from either side to express ourselves, because that's what it really comes down to for me, is to express ourselves. I mean, who started wearing, pink or purple braids or things like that? It goes the same if you're wearing pink or purple or whatever creative hairstyle, but in a straight way, in a straight style and things like that. I think it's important to encourage that freedom for all people to express themselves. Of course, it is important that we address any hesitation to wear your natural hair. That says a lot. But again, freedom of expression, we shouldn't be policing each other either.
Yeah, I just want to mention that. Yeah, I just want to mention real quick that Nat, the Bush doctor, his camera is still having problems with his camera. We still hope to get him at some point before the show ends. But look, let's face it. So, at some point, the Kardashians became the world standard for some reason, right? But who did they emulate with their appearances, right? At least with the body shaping and the lips and things of that nature. They emulated Black women, right?
Yes, but they also emulated Black women. I mean, we've got to start taking ownership too of some of these things. We can't just keep saying this is the white man doing this, right? Kanye West, I recall he had a video call one time, and he specifically said he wanted multiracial women. Basically, no Black women apply. Okay. And the Kanye Wests and these other brothers are sitting up here, displaying these women. And so again, our young women are internalizing this, and they're thinking, in order to be beautiful, I have to have straight hair, I have to have wavy hair. And to go back to the Barbie is a billion-dollar industry. And until we have Barbies that have our hair that our girls can actually comb and not fall out of the scalp, we will continue to wear our hairs like our dolls and what's portrayed in the media.
Yeah. Sam, I want to go to you, because the 2000s, they welcomed the second wave of the natural hair movement, spurred by films and the advent of social media. The movement fueled a cultural shift that has caused legions of Black women to abandon their perms and pressing combs. Director Regina Kimball's My Nappy Roots, a journey through Black heritage, traced the history and politics around natural Black hair in the U.S., thus raising consciousness in the African American community. This was 1 year before Chris Rock would release Good Hair, a similarly themed documentary that focused on the economics of Black women buying weaves and perming their hair. One of the most famous lines of that film was delivered by Paul Mooney, who said, "If your hair is relaxed, they are relaxed. If your hair is nappy, they are not happy." So Sam, I want your thoughts on that, because we did see a shift in the 2000s.
Without a doubt, the 2000s brought quite a lot, and I can't necessarily speak on the politics of Black women's hair. I'm not going to try to. At the very same time, what I will say is that oftentimes a lot of our decisions we make is because we want to keep them relaxed, even if it's at a subconscious level. Speaking on my personal experiences, I've had waves, throughout most of my adolescence, and up until I turned 24 or so, I had waves, and I kept when I did have facial hair, it wasn't too much, so it was always about just maintaining a look that was appeasing and so-called professional. And, you know, based on what I heard, you know, from documentaries and then speaking with sisters, I've pretty much heard the same thing. As far as what happened in the 2000s, what I saw happening was a conversation that we had amongst ourselves, you know, about what this was doing to us and how we can get out of it. And part of that was about economics, because if you look back at that documentary, Chris Rock pointed at hair that came from East Asia, you know, and he talked about how they made a killing off of us in the industry. And that speaks to how Black people continue to be a consumer class. We're at the bottom of the totem pole for that very reason, because they take advantage of the fact that we don't have knowledge of self, or that we are just not prideful about things that are naturally ours.
Yeah. And I want to go back to Carrington, because Carrington, you're on one of the foremost historically Black colleges, campuses in America, Howard University. And obviously, you know, you see a lot of different hairstyles, or at least I assume you see a lot of different hairstyles. Can you say what goes on the campus as far as the hairstyles and even discussion that might surround the hairstyles?
Absolutely. So unfortunately at HBCUs, there can be this encouragement at times with some professors in some departments to code switch. And, you know, some believe that it helps you become more successful, more digestible in these workspaces. And so you'll hear that, oh, you know, they may not say it outright, don't wear your hair like this or that, but they'll say, come with your hair neat, come with your hair this way. And you kind of know what they mean, especially if, you know, you want to take some kind of office, maybe on campus, student government, pageant girls, you often see them wearing, which is really popular at HBCUs, you often see them wearing their hair straight because maybe it's internalized that it looks more elegant. Of course, this does not go for the whole campus. This doesn't go for the whole student body or anything like that. But some of that residue from you know, all these other spaces does make it into Black spaces. And so that's a tough one. That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ashia mentioned School Days. We remember that movie pretty well. Ashia, you wanted to expand on that?
Yeah, as I was listening to Carrington, I thought about School Days, jigaboos and wannabes, and then I also thought about the episode of In Living Color. I'm sorry, Living Single, when Kyle, when he was told that his locks weren't appropriate, that he was told to, you know, if you want to move up, and it was coming from Black people. It is so disappointing that in 2022, we are still having these same tired conversations. And it's a lot of times coming from us, as we've been saying over and over. Your grandparents, your grandmother tells your mom tells you. It just keeps getting passed down and passed down. My daughter, she was telling me that kids are still saying, you know, nappy hair. You know, or they're talking about good hair and bad hair. And I was like, people are still saying that, you know, because I didn't raise my kids to talk that way. So I'm thinking that when do we stop perpetuating that? When do we stop perpetuating that? When do we say, okay, this is really silly, that we continue to have these the way we think about hair. Yes, hair is important, but it's hair. You know, I mean, it's not. We put a lot into our hair. We put a lot into our hair. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but my goodness, it's hair. It comes and it goes. You may lose it. You may grow it. It's just not the be all end all to who you are as a person. I think we put so much into our hair, and it's exhausting. You know, it is exhausting. I had long hair most of my life, and I mean, hair is freedom. Cutting my hair off is total freedom. For me, I'm like, I don't have to do anything to it. I can go. I love not having hair right now. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. What was I thinking about before? Because you just you put so much time in. As Black women, we put so much time and energy into our hair.
So you said it's freedom. So freedom is power, as Sam and Carrington and you guys have been saying this morning, though, right?
It is power, but also I don't want to judge any woman who does what she wants to do with her hair, because I think she's empowered as well. You know, if she goes and buys a weave, if that makes her feel good, then she's empowered. You know, whatever it is that you do for yourself, make sure. I don't judge women who want to have this hair or that hair. I don't judge, because that's what you're doing for yourself to make you feel good as a woman. But what I'm saying is we have to stop this perpetuating this, and you have to feel good if you have. The only way to feel good is if you have long and straight hair. You know, that's the only way. We have to stop this good hair, bad hair. When are we going to stop perpetuating things that were placed on us by other people, yet we continue to keep on talking about this as if it's reality, as if it has to be this way? We can change this. As Katrina was saying, we can change the way we view ourselves.
Yeah, and so internally, certainly we can change the conversation. We can change the situation. But externally, right? It's the same thing. You could say, and some may say it's not the same thing, but you could say, well, Black people stop going into the space of police officers. Is that going to stop police officers from killing us? So what I'm saying is that we're still being marginalized or discriminated against because of our choice of hairstyle, and not just internally, but externally. I mean, am I right, Katrina, Sam?
Well, the military just, I believe it was last year, allowed our sisters to start wearing their hair in braids, right? And this is that, the highest level. These are sisters who are helping to protect this country, and they couldn't even wear their hair the way they could, or the way that was convenient for them. So they're just now starting. So I think that, it speaks to volumes that we have to continue to mobilize like we're doing, continue to advocate for the Crown Act, make sure that it's passed, like right along with other legislation, like our anti-policing hate crime bills. We need to make sure that those are passed as well. But we have to be that voice. And like O'Shea said, yes, we must acknowledge slavery and the ill effects of it and the impact. We must never allow people to forget what was done to us, but we must move forward. We have the knowledge to move forward. We can't allow generations to continue to hate themselves.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And Sam, I wanted your thoughts on it as well.
I once again, I really want for us to explore the correlation between growing your hair the way that you want to and entrepreneurship. I don't know the statistics, but I'm pretty sure that there's a correlation between growing your own hair out the way you want to and pursuing opportunities that bring money into your pocket without a middleman, so to speak. Because, with the passage of the Crown Act, I'm very faithful, of course, that, we will reach this promised land, so to speak, in terms of having our hair individuality recognized. At the very same time, studying history once again, every time there's an action, there's always a reaction. And the law oftentimes leaves enough wiggle room for interpretation. So, there will be test cases once again and again and again and again, which is why by the end of the day, in practicing self-determination, we have to go beyond just growing our hair and expressing ourselves. We have to create institutions, those of us who are of like minds, where Black hair is celebrated and not regulated. We have to create platforms where we are espousing these values. We can't keep playing on their land and expecting them to wholeheartedly bend towards our will. It is just not natural in that sense. So, it's my hope that the conversation continues to go beyond, well, why do they hate us for our hair? And it gets to a point where we are establishing platforms and businesses where we can do whatever it is that we want. Point blank.
Yeah, absolutely. And Katrina, your final thoughts on this?
I was just thinking, I was putting it in the chat, Sam reminded me, and it starts with our children and education. And that's why we need more African-centered schools. And if we can't get African-centered schools, we need more Saturday school programs like every other culture has. We need to racially socialize our children and empower them so that they can be resilient and love themselves.
Yeah. Oh, Shia, and I just want to go back to before you give your closing thoughts on this. Sam talked about the connection between being an entrepreneur and here, and how that can, has been impacted and could be impacted. I want to get your take on that, because that isn't that important to think about as well.
Yeah, and I've never really thought much about that, so I would like to see some stats on that as well, because I do know people who had locks way back in the 90s, and we had the conversation about, well, what happens if a job says that you can't have your hair like this, and the conversation was, I wouldn't take that job.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't work there. And so I remember thinking about that, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of strength there. That's a lot of courage there. And so I kind of internalized that to say, I wouldn't, if a job told me I couldn't wear my hair the way I wanted to wear my hair, I wouldn't want that job. And I love color. So I've had purple hair, I've had red hair, that's long. I've cut it off for a couple years. So my daughter is right now, she has pink hair. She has two different colors in her hair. A lot of times we like color. So to say that we couldn't do what we want to do with our hair, that would be a big problem for me. So I think that is empowering, and it probably does move people out to create their own career.
Yeah, and I know, Carrington, I know you've changed your hairstyle a couple of times recently. When you do that, I mean, what drives a person to change their hairstyles? I mean, I explain that, because again, as men, we're kind of behind the times on stuff like that. So explain that to me.
Ultimately, for me, I'm still learning about my hair. Every day, I'm still learning about my hair. In the learning process, it doesn't have a set time, but my obligations sometimes do. And I have to figure out what I'm going to do to my hair for the day. And so I think that also comes from, us as Black people. My mom has different hair than my brother. My brother has different hair than me. My brother's hair is a little more looser textures. I'm the only one in my family with hair like this. So we're just all trying to wing it and figure it out. And sometimes I'll slap a wig on, because that's just what works for me. That's what works for me for that day. But I want to shout out to my mom, who might be watching this. And because she made sure that I had books with people whose hair looked like mine, even, back in the early 2000s. I'm a 99 baby. So this, access to these kind of books. And, she made sure that I was watching The Proud Family, watching Black people on TV, watching people that looked like me, so that I wasn't really embarrassed. I didn't grow to be embarrassed of my hair. It wasn't until later in life that I got into wigs and whatnot, but I wore my hair like this most of my childhood. Honestly, up until a couple years ago is when I started experimenting, honestly, because I could afford to experiment a little bit. But, this is what I grew up with. And I think, that's really what it comes back to, is representation.
Mm-hmm.
Oshia mentioned Living Single, the show Living Single. There have been some shows, right, that have depicted the different styles that Black women and Black men have, and isn't that important?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I believe it's important. That's definitely what helped me. I ended up going to a predominantly white high school. And so that definitely helped me navigate with no shame. I wore my hair like this every day in high school. Again, it wasn't until I got to the HBCUs that I started seeing, like, oh, is it better if I want to run for this, office, that I should wear my hair straight? Does that look more kempt? That's when I started feeling a little bit of the pressure. And I know we talked about, how Black spaces can encourage us to go that way, and how that can be problematic. But yeah.
Yeah. And, we see so much in the media about images and how things should be, and advertising and things of that nature. So I think it's extremely important. You mentioned The Proud Family, you mentioned Living Single, and there are other shows. And as we see the different, there's our boss, Dr. Chavis, and his hair, and others. We see the different, the evolution of Black hair, right? Bobby Henry says, I don't know. He says, in terms of brothers being lost, man, he says, I've seen brothers with pink, green, purple hair as well. And James Wright responds to Bobby Henry by saying, "That's weird." But is it really weird? I mean, we have all types. You guys mentioned it this morning. Now, when we go into the colors, is that a whole different conversation? The different colors, or is that the same conversation?
I think it's a generational conversation, right? For those folks like myself who are conservative, I'm like, oh my goodness. But my child, she's 9. Mom, I want purple and pink hair. She sees my nieces who are in their 20s wearing their hair like that. And I'm like, okay. As long as, like we said before, Marcus Garvey said, take the kinks out of your mind. So that concept doesn't just apply to the coil of our hair. We need to stop looking at just the aesthetics and look at what's underneath.
Yeah. And Sam, I'm going to leave it to you to represent for the guys.
In terms of the different color hair, I think back to Wiz Khalifa in like 2009 or so. Everybody had the patch of blonde hair and so forth and so on. And I'm not really that type of guy per se, but I'm not going to knock people for having that type of hair because black is not a monolith. At the very same time, what I will say is you always want to think about your why. Like, why are you doing this? What's influencing you? And I think us, especially as black people, we got to think very carefully about that in any decision that we make because we are still in a colonial system and we have the vestiges of that system in us and around us everywhere that we go. So I'm not one to knock anybody, but I will implore people to think very deeply about why it is that they do what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we had so many difficulties with Nat, the Bush doctor. Mathis, his camera was not working this morning. We had hoped to bring him on to join this discussion, but we really appreciate him. We appreciate all you, Carrington, Oshia, Katrina, and of course, Sam. I think it's a great conversation. I think that the Black press is where you should have that conversation, and we certainly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much this morning. And don't forget to tune in beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern this morning for the virtual NNPA Midwinter National Issues Forum, where the theme is Advancing the Black Press of America, Reaffirming, Engaging, and Empowering. Go to www.nnpa-events.com, 11 a.m. Eastern. You can see it here. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.